Hello, Smart Community friends. It's our podcast birthday week. The Smart Community podcast has turned 3 years old. So to celebrate, we're doing a week of bonus episodes, bringing together multiple guest answers over multiple days to the question, where to next for smart cities and communities? And in this episode, I'm sharing with you the answers from a range of guests from this past year. Susan Shaheen from episode 184, Michael Milford from episode 160, Renee Ray from episode 163, Kris Libunao from episode 191, and Chad Ramage from episode 162. One big theme that comes through in many guest answers is around the economic sustainability of smart initiatives and whether governments and organisations are putting enough thought into making sure projects are viable past the pilot phase, and whether investments are being made into smart foundations, not just sexy, shiny hype. Several guests make points around mobility technology and accessibility options, designing our tools to serve underserved populations and to increase accessibility for those who need it, not already privileged people who live in places like Silicon Valley, for example. As Kris says, we need to find the balance between business and society. I really enjoyed listening back to these snippets. Susan talks about the sustainable pilots and really thinking about equity, environmental, and economic sustainability of these pilots. Michael talks a lot about EVs, so electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles, and the implications of those. Renee talks about having a healthy dose of skepticism, but also is optimistic about mobility as a service and the autonomous vehicle space. Kris Libunao talks about having an agile approach and also putting the user at the centre and bringing the heart back to smart communities. And finally, Chad Ramage talks about solving real problems for people that are underserved in this current space. And he also shares a pretty horrific story from some travel that he did in Berlin. Now, we'll be back in your podcatchers again tomorrow with another bonus episode. So as always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoy making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Where to next for smart communities?
Well, I think, we need more pilot programs. I'd like to see pilots that are really focused on the three key areas of sustainability. So equity, environment, and economics. So sustainable. So instead of just developing a pilot that has a lot of bells and whistles, that has not really done its homework on business models and the need and role for government and subsidies, I think we've got to move out of that chapter of pilot programs. And this comes from somebody who's put probably at least close to 10 pilots on the ground over the course of my career. And I think more emphasis needs to go into that economic sustainability piece and social sustainability piece. And then hopefully as we solve those dimensions, we'll also maximize the environmental and energy benefits. But I do think we need to shift our focus a bit to not just being about technology proving grounds, but economic, financially viable initiatives so that you don't create some strategy or solution that is only with a community for the length of time that the business or the government is shining a light on it.
Yep, that's so important. Yeah, and I think it's something we don't focus in on enough. We get excited about the technology and also from an environmental perspective, when we're focusing on that as well, but the business model has to weigh up whatever that looks like. And I think we need more emphasis on that when we are doing pilots and not just being for the length. Totally, I agree.
It's often an afterthought, and it really can't be, because otherwise it feels like maybe we're being disingenuous with the people that we're expecting to use these systems, right? So here's a system. We really want to see how you react to it, how you change your behavior as a result of it. But then really we don't have a vision for how to sustain it. And so why go through all of that?
So where to next for smart cities and communities? Or where to next for autonomous vehicles? Let's go there.
I don't know anything about this area, but I'm fascinated by this whole electric vehicle versus hydrogen scenario that is playing out at the moment. I think in many respects, I've been seeking a lot of information in this area, but I think in many respects, the level of agreement and informativeness around those technologies is probably where autonomous vehicles were 3 or 4 years ago, where a lot of people are saying very, very different things, and there's really no consensus about what could happen. I'm fascinated how that will play out, because that's a critical ingredient of anything to do with mobility technology, obviously. In terms of the core technology in autonomous vehicles, like around the AI, it will be fascinating to see whether these pivots that people have made, like delivery autonomous vehicles, whether they are commercially sustainable in the long run. It's not necessarily a given that they are, but we'll find out probably in the next couple of years. And that will be interesting, because that will, if it works, that will at least be a smaller proven market for the technology, and perhaps they can piggyback on top of that.
Yeah, the EV versus hydrogen, and, obviously the different parts of EV as well, the different levels or ways that it will work will be really interesting. Something I've been following as well, and which countries are really embracing it. And I've recently been in Columbus, Ohio, and one of they got a grant to do specific electrification. So they're obviously they're picking this electrification. Whereas when I was in Korea a couple of years ago, hydrogen was definitely top of what they were thinking about, and I've seen some more things come out about that, and whether it will be a combination, or whether it's a combination of hybrid, or maybe better hybrid than we have currently, EVs, even low emission fuels to a certain degree, for a certain time, and then hydrogen is going to be really fascinating to see.
Yeah, and if you go to places like, obviously, if you go to Silicon Valley and you're a sort of upper middle class person living in Silicon Valley, and you have a Tesla, from your sort of narrow perspective, it's fantastic, because you get lane priority on the highway, you get priority parking, there's lots of charging stations everywhere, you never have to really worry about topping your car up. The car's cheaper probably there than over in other countries. But whether that is sustainable, like Silicon Valley is not a representative location in the world by any means in all aspects. So whether that model is sustainable and scalable at large, there seems to be a lot of controversy over that as well.
Yeah, that's so true. And I guess going to when we talk about solar and the grid, how that will play out. I mean, obviously it's a similar energy, but it's actually, can we continue to afford to give away free electricity for EVs when we have, 50% of the market or whatever? And then in Australia as well, where will those charging stations be? And, we talk about regional areas, and it's going to be the whole ecosystem. How that all fits together will be really interesting.
Yeah, and the implications are fascinating too, because you think, let's say we had widespread solar power and it was really cheap or effectively free in some instances, you think, oh, that's going to be fantastic for electric vehicles. But another potential consequence of that, as I understand it, is you can use a lot of that excess power you get from solar power to make hydrogen production or hydrogen-related energy storage very effective. So suddenly that makes that technology more viable. So the implications don't seem to be always as obvious as you might hope.
Yeah, that's true. And going to the solar and, I guess the private going off grid, and then government, government connected, services, that's again that sounds really awesome until we have, say a blackout or whatever. And then all the people that can afford it still have access. But the people that were on the government, which should be the kind of solid, stable, reliable network, doesn't work anymore. And so then we have this divide, which can potentially increase and decrease. And it's going to be fascinating.
Yep. Hopefully we can, everyone can navigate these issues together, and we can make it work as well as possible.
Yeah. So where to next for smart communities?
despite my skepticism about the future of mobility as a service and of autonomous vehicles, there's so much attention and money being put into them that I do feel that there's a lot of value to come from working in that space. So I'm going to be in San Francisco in a couple of weeks for a small conference with maybe about 100 or so folks talking about mobility as a service and what it might look like in a U.S. context. And really, I'm very optimistic about the future of smart communities. And I think partly that's because, at least in the U.S., we have such a diverse population. And I'm very pro-millennial and pro-Zoomer. I think there's a lot of curiosity and willingness to try new things from some of my younger colleagues that I feel like there is a ton of innovation happening in the mobility space. And I'm honestly not sure where we're going to go next, but I'm excited to continue to be part of it.
Yeah, no, me too. And I think what I am really keen on is seeing where, like you said, I also have I like to think a healthy level of skepticism when people are like, oh yeah, it's coming tomorrow and that type of thing. But I'm keen to go to see that money to be invested so then we can actually learn a lot. So even if we don't necessarily have, the final end utopian thing, we'll actually have such a rich experience along the way, hopefully, where we can actually focus in on some of those other areas. And, it's kind of made transportation sexy. So people are focusing on it, which is exciting, but actually taking some of that smart, sexy money into the foundations and the base level needs that people have. So I'm also optimistic because of that focus.
Yeah. I think that's what I like so much about scooters is that in transportation, we tend to think about transportation as a means to an end and just something that you have to do. And I feel like there's a lot of delight and joy in taking scooters. And it kind of reminded people that the trip itself can be pleasurable and not just a means to an end.
Yeah, I love that. And it's definitely something I've been thinking about as well. I've been thinking about getting a scooter actually, but I'm not sure yet.
I've honestly only been on one a few times because how unstable they are. I mostly stick to a bike.
Okay, well, where to next for smart communities?
Well, for smart communities, I hope, as I've mentioned earlier, I hope it will be more agile. I mean, in terms of planning, I hope the smart community planning and smart community implementation would be more agile, more tactical, rather than comprehensive and expensive as well. So I hope it will be that. Then later on, the smart communities, I have this vision that it should be, the end user value first before the business itself. And, finding the balance between the business and the society as well. So, yeah, and later on, or hopefully sooner than later, I guess, smart communities with hearts.
No, I love that. Where to next for smart communities?
So from here, we need to continue looking for real problems to solve for people who live and work in communities and give people the information and the power to be able to plan and make those informed decisions. And that's where I think, as we were talking about earlier, having that access to real-time data, pedestrian flow, parking, that would give people the information they need to say, well, we might go in to this restaurant to have a business meeting, or we might head to this location for a family birthday party. But if you can see one side of town's completely packed and you can't move and the other side's a bit quieter, then you might then move across over to there. And again, that's going to support small business and help people in their day-to-day be able to move freely and with that less anxiety of, is it going to be busy? Is it going to be rushed? Am I going to feel overcrowded? And yeah, I think that'd be a great stepping stone forward.
Yeah, I agree. Keeping that accessibility front of mind, and actually when we're designing these tools, designing it not for somebody who can get around quite easily, but actually designing it for people that need that increase of accessibility, because then you'll get an application that actually serves this population that is underserved currently. So yeah, I think that's so important.
And thinking of when we were talking about travel earlier, I was in Berlin last year for my wedding anniversary, and we just had 5 things go wrong in a row. And it was like the first one was just trying to get off the plane. Normally there's this Medicab that they attach to the side of the plane that you get lowered down, and then it's just a ramp out. Whether they couldn't be bothered finding it or there wasn't one of the 2 available, just these 2 massive hulking dudes strapped me to a chair and carried me down a flight of stairs. Then trying to get a cab, it was going to be €200 to go 20 minutes down the road. So we just got some tickets for the train. We jumped on the train. I was watching every carriage pull up, how flat it was, straight in, easy to get on and off. I thought, yep, this is going to be great. When we got 20 minutes down the road where we were going, 2-foot step up onto the platform. And just the way this lady on the train said to me, "Oh, you should have planned this better."
No.
And it just makes you go, really? We're in a non-English speaking country mainly, and you research as much as you can to try and get around. And that's the attitude you get of, oh, well, you know, if you'd have planned better, you probably would have known you couldn't get off here, which it's hard enough researching in another language.
Are you looking for an engaging speaker, MC, or facilitator for your next big event? Then we've got you covered. Zoe is a go-to speaker, MC, and conversation facilitator with a difference. She's a master at simplifying the complex and making connections you might never see. Book Zoe for your next event. Email hello@mysmart.community or head over to her speaker page, www.mysmart.community/speaking.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.